Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition and we turn out to poem 444, It Feels a Shame to Be Alive. Now this is one of the few Civil War poems that we will see from Emily Dickinson. You will remember from 409 when we played the game of this one. They dropped like flakes, they dropped like stars, like petals from a rose, when suddenly across the June a wind with finger goes. They perished in the seamless grass, no eye could find the place, but God can summon every face on his repealless list. Or when we were together for poem 426, it don't sound so terrible quite as it did. I ran it over, dead, brain dead. Put it in Latin, left of my school. Seems it don't shriek so under rule. Turn it a little full in the face. A trouble looks bitterest. Shift it, just say, when tomorrow comes this way, I shall have weighted down one day. I suppose it will interrupt me some till I get accustomed. But then the tomb, like other new things, shows largest then and smaller by habit. It's shrewder then. Put the thought in advance a year. How like a fit then, murderer where? When we come to this conversation, we are reminded that in a letter, number 280, to Thomas Higginson, Emily wrote, quote, "War feels to me an oblique place." And in many ways, this is a challenging poem for us, because Emily is going to demand a couple of rhetorical questions about the sacrifice of fallen warriors and the legitimacy of that sacrifice. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm really hopeful that you've worked through our preceding 443 poems. We just finished 443, I Tie My Hat. Now, in many ways, this, for Emily, is a return to the Spartans, their great stand at Thermopylae in 480 BC, and as well Herodotus, as he will remind us that the Spartans, of course, killed to the last man, buried where they fell, and a stone, of course, was put up over them with the inscription, Herodotus tells us, quote, "Go tell the Spartans, you who read, we took their orders, and here lie dead," end quote, Herodotus 7:228. Now, in many ways, scholars have pointed out, this is really not an elegy of so much of as a meditation, we might say, on justice. And, of course, questions. Do citizens, for example, deserve the sacrifice made by the death of warriors? Well, and in some ways, we're back again for Emily to John 15:13, greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. And another question is, what do friends owe in return for such a sacrifice? As I give this lecture, we have just observed Memorial Day weekend, where as a culture we hold those as most precious to us, she will use the word divinity, who gave their lives, who sacrificed their lives for the well-being of our nation, for the survival of our nation. And this is how she says it. It feels a shame to be alive when men so brave are dead. One envies the distinguished dust permitted such a head. The stone that tells defending whom this Spartan put away, what little of him we possessed in pawn for liberty. The price is great, sublimely paid. Do we deserve a thing that lives like that lives like dollars must be piled before we may obtain? Are we that weight sufficient worth, that such enormous pearl as life dissolved be for us in battle's horrid bowl? It may be a renown to live. I think the men who die, those unsustained saviors, present divinity. By the way, in the Johnson edition in line 18, the word man should actually be men. And of course, it makes a whole lot more sense then that we are talking about large numbers of soldiers. And of course, we've already played some of this game in regards to poem 67, success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed, not one of all the purple host who took the flag today. You'll remember Emily rarely makes these kinds of references to fallen warriors. Here she begins with the word shame. Now, her use of the word shame is fascinating. We saw it already in 295, we saw it in 313, we saw it in 412. We will see the word shame in 473 and 486 and 551 and 725. We will see it when we get to poem 969, and it will read like this. He who in himself believes, fraud cannot presume. Faith is constancy's result, and assumes from home, cannot perish though it fail every second time, but defaced vicariously for some other shame. We'll see this word shame in 1274. We'll see it in 1304. We'll see it when we get to 1412. She'll say it this way. Shame is the shawl of pink in which we wrap the soul, to keep it from infesting eyes, the elemental veil which helpless nature drops when pushed upon a scene repugnant to her probity. Shame is the tint divine. Now, I think it's fascinating. This word will end. This poem will end with the word divinity. We'll see the word shame in 1427 and as well 1683. Notice she says it feels a shame to be alive, as opposed to obviously those dead. When men so brave, again, the men who die will be the way the poem ends, are dead. One envies, notice it's one here and not we. One envies thee, and then notice the use of the capital D, distinguished dust. Later in the poem, of course, it will be divinity for the third of these D words. Distinguished dust permitted such a head. In other words, when we stand and we look at the fallen, we cannot help, of course, but think of Whitman's drum taps. We did all of the poems in Leaves of Grass, the Deathbed Edition, in our series at learnstrong.net called Talks with Walt. And when we hit the drum taps poems, we made this observation. It's impossible to witness through history or our study, as well as obviously through these titles, the fallen, and not have some level of respect for the distinguished dust, right? And then, of course, the stone. Here, obviously, referencing possibly the Herodotus set of lines. The stone that tells defending whom this Spartan put away. What little of him. We mentioned Emily's use of the word little in 172 poems. We, notice, we'll start to see now these we's. We possessed in pawn for liberty. Now, I think the word pawn is an important word in this poem. As we have said so many times in our study, it's often just one word. And notice her use of the word pawn. How we read this poem will have a lot to do with the tone of the poem that we assume. And we will often say, Emily can be read in multiplicity of ways depending upon how you read the tone. For example, is she saying that these men, these fallen men, these brave men were pawns for liberty? Of course, technically she's making the reference to Sparta, right? Then she'll go to the Matthew 13, 45 through 46 Pearl of Great Price story. The price is great. Notice the economic language here. Sublimely paid. Sublime or sublimely is used in 8 of her poems. Do we, first of 2 rhetorical questions, that the obvious answer to both of these is no. Do we deserve a thing that lives like dollars, notice capital D, must be piled before we may obtain? This idea being, do we deserve this? Now, who is the we? Obviously the question. Do we deserve a thing that lives like dollars must be piled before we may obtain? Now, again, some have seen her tone here as not so much patriotic as rather pathetic, as we use that term from our study of Aristotle's Poetics. In other words, over-related to pathos. In other words, these men's lives were piled up the way you would pile up dollars, dollar bills maybe. It's interesting how I'm going to leave it to you guys to decide how you want to read this, right? Are we that wait? Now, I think there is quite a bit of Milton standing behind this. You'll remember in Sonnet 19, they also serve who only stand and wait. You know, we've given full lectures on this poem. And as well, I think Milton's Paradise Lost, Book 1, line 51, and his use of horrid is one that she has as well ready to reference. Are we that wait sufficient worth that such enormous pearl, notice capital E, capital P, as life dissolved be? Now, this dissolved, some scholars believe, is a reference to Cleopatra and her dissolving a pearl inside of a cup of wine to demonstrate her disconcern with wealth. Enormous pearl as life dissolved be for us. Notice capital U, right? By the way, dissolved takes us back to poem 370. In battles, notice capitalized, horrid bull. Now, horrid she'll use 2 more times in 585 and in 614. In other words, she asks this question, do we citizens deserve this respect? And then, are we that really are waiting, those of us alive, of sufficient worth, right? In other words, was it worth it, this taking of all this life? Then after these kind of speculative rhetorical questions, she finishes it with, it may be. In other words, it's speculative. A renown to live, I think the men who die, those unsustained, some have read this as well as a word of skepticism, cynicism possibly even, saviors, and this will take us back to poem 217. Notice here she'll compare these fallen warriors with Christ, the Savior, present divinity, divinity being used in 7 poems of Emily's. What exactly is the point of this poem at 2a? I think her argument is that those fallen warriors deserve our respect. But at 2b, the question is the tone. Is it patriotic? Is it patriotic? Is it accusatory? Is it, in some ways, as we said, pathetic? There is, of course, at 3a, any number of places that we can go. Think of all of the war poems that are so famous, from Sasson to all of the other great British writers of great war poems. Think about, again, the drum taps poems of Whitman. Think of Homer's Iliad and juxtapose that, as we have done in our full study of the Iliad at learnstrong.net, with Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. All of these titles trying to come to terms, with the question. Wilfred Owen's poems come immediately to mind, don't they, right? Of the value and the worth of the sacrifice of young men and young women in time of war. Finally, at 3b, what is your view in respect to the fallen warriors, and to what degree is Emily challenging you to think about the importance of patriotism? Thank you.